Welcome to the series of seminar video tutorials Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the father of Olivia, and the lecturer appointed by Dr. Hummer on Germanische Heilkunde theory. Tracks cause the various chronic courses of conflict. Thus, for example, a motor conflict, monocyclic causes in the crisis an epileptic seizure, tetanus. In the polycyclic course, epilepsy, or the tic. In a hanging healing Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, tremor. And hanging active, a paralysis, or stroke. But the cause of all these symptoms is and remains the motor conflict. We can get with any SBS into these different chronic progressions. This seminar video tutorial will also discuss which conflicts are better not to resolve, because we cannot survive the healing phase. The objective is to learn to understand that we can reduce the clinical dictionary's Remble to the scientific diagnosis chart of Germanische Heilkunde. You can experience nature. But you have to believe in the swine flu listed in the Remble. You will learn more about this in the approximately 1-hour seminar video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our seminar tutorial Germanische Heilkunde by Dr. Gerd Hummer, MD. Good evening to you. My name is Helmut Pilhar. I am the father of Olivia and the lecturer appointed by Dr. Hummer for Germanische Heilkunde theory. Our topic today, the conflict courses. The courses or progressions of conflicts build on tracks. Via these tracks, I can get into any phase of any special biological program. I can run through each special program once, or I can also activate and run through it again and again, via tracks. I can get into so-called hanging healing with any special program. In hanging healing, I have only the healing phases symptoms of the special program. But via the tracks, I can get into and remain in hanging active. If I have a patient in front of me, in whom only the conflict active symptoms of the respective special program are present, that's what we call chronic diseases and allergies. Every track points back to the conflict, and the conflict has always caught one unexpectedly on the wrong foot, in a highly acute and isolating way. At the moment of that shock, a Hummer focus arose in the brain. At that very moment, our brain went snap, like a camera. And it stored all the sensory impressions that had occupied us at that moment of shock. Those sensory impressions could be smells or sounds, or even what I was eating or drinking at that very moment. They could be people, situations, light, temperature conditions, all kinds of sensory impressions. Mostly people just say, he has a milk allergy. Yes, okay, good. But milk is the track to the conflict. What symptoms does he react with on the organ level? From the organ symptom, we can infer the conflict. If he reacts to milk with his intestine, then it was an anger conflict that was highly acute, isolating, and caught him on the wrong foot. Or, if he reacts to milk with his skin, then the cause was a separation conflict that was highly acute, isolating, and caught him on the wrong foot. Milk is just the track, and if I trigger this track, I inevitably have a relapse, and without the 3 criteria being met. So, this original conflict was highly acute, isolating, and caught me on the wrong foot. If I am allergic to milk from now on, it's always because the track takes me to this original conflict. If this original conflict was a separation, I have a relapse with my skin. But if this was an argument, I have a relapse with my intestine. I always react with the original special program. A relapse, of course, always means a relapse on all 3 levels. Psyche, brain, and organ. The individual is inseparable from himself, and we think of these 3 levels only to be able to work with them more easily. The individual is an inseparable entity. So, with a relapse on the level of the psyche, I have compulsive thinking again. On the level of the brain, I have again a Hummer focus in a photographable disc-shaped target ring configuration. On the organ level I have cell minus, cell plus, or a functional failure, depending on the particular special program. And this program proceeds on its course until I again come off the track. When that happens, my body instantly switches into healing phase. And my brain again instructs the microbes to do their job. Surplus tissue is broken down again, or holes in the tissue are filled again under swelling, up until the crisis. From the crisis onwards the swelling goes down, until I am healthy again. Only then do I get back to my normal day-night rhythm, which continues until I trigger this track again and start the program anew. From now on, it is called allergy, or chronic illness, or also occupation-typical illness. Whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. Everything that runs chronically does so via tracks. The cause of allergy or epilepsy, or MS, is always monocausal, the initial biological conflict shock, which was highly acute, isolating, and caught the individual on the wrong foot. The rest of the diagnosed condition is just the track. It's important to understand that the track is not something mean, that nature came up with to torture me, or because nature is flawed. Rather, an event got me caught on the wrong foot. That event was the biological conflict, the DHS, Dirk-Hummer syndrome. In fact, nature has given us a mechanism. My brain stores everything it has just been busy with, in order to warn me of this situation if it recurs in the future. You can imagine this as a permanent radar. As soon as I hit the track again, the radar instantly sounds, beep, 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 beep. Attention. Danger. This is just like back then. Back then it was the same. And so a special program starts in advance, to help me cope more easily with the problem. The symptom is not the problem. The original conflict is the problem. If I had a problem with the neighbor, and I reacted with my intestine to this, highly acute, isolating, and catching me on the wrong foot event, my brain stores the neighbor as a track. Now I'm allergic to the neighbor, and I will relapse because of him. As soon as I see the neighbor, the alarm goes off, beep, beep, beep. And the special intestine program automatically starts fully, in advance of the potential recurrence of the problem with that neighbor. In anticipation that, here comes the indigestible morsel again, that has to be broken down. So, the track is nothing more than an early warning system. Animals also notice these tracks immediately. Animals instinctively avoid the tracks and thus do not get a relapse. A dog that someone has kicked, remembers that and avoids that person. When we humans get kicked by the boss, but we keep running to the company every day. So we are on track every day and therefore chronically ill. A few examples. Now, no matter which special program, whether it's the intestine, the breast, the bone, the skin, the musculature, a conflict is thoroughly and generally resolved, when it can no longer happen. Or when I have been able to change my attitude towards it. So, for example, if I had trouble with the neighbor, on the organ level I now have cell plus, that is colon cancer. The conflict is not resolved until it can no longer happen. Let's assume that the lightning strikes the neighbor, bam! The issue is settled, my conflict is resolved. My neighbor is lying in the cemetery, this conflict certainly cannot happen again. Now the weight falls off my soul, and now I enter the healing phase. And at the end of the healing, I am healthy. Or else, I can change my attitude towards the neighbor. So let's assume the trouble was nothing more than a misunderstanding, and then we fix the problem over a few beers. Since then, we have been good friends. Then too, I'll go through the healing phase, after which the conflict is finally resolved. We'll be good friends ever since. As long as the conflict can happen again at any time, or as long as I can't laugh about it, the early warning system of the tracks will continue to operate. Once a month I'm in the active phase of the intestine program, for 1 day. I have constipation once a month, and in the healing I have diarrhea. I have constipation 1 day, and when it's gone, I have diarrhea 1 day. Or I see my neighbor every day. I have permanent diarrhea. If I see the neighbor every day for an hour, then I have a hanging healing. This is what's going on when I have a patient in front of me who only has healing phase symptoms of a special program. This is called colitis, for example, in the colon. But what if the neighbor moves in with me, and I see him and hear him around the clock? If he is permanent with me, then I have colon cancer. But beware, I don't have unlimited time on this. I don't eat, I don't sleep. The tumor gets bigger and bigger. I am on the sure path to intestinal obstruction, and I become emaciated. At some point my battery runs out, and I die of emaciation. It's always just the same trouble with the neighbor, the same program with the bowel. The different symptoms depend on how often I have to see my neighbor. Is there a track, or is there no track? And how often do I get on the track? Yes, we have such a thick list of diagnostic labels in our medical dictionary, in which 10,000 clinical pictures are listed alphabetically. Like a telephone book. That is the system of conventional medicine. We can reduce this gigantic medical dictionary to the diagnostic chart. You just need to have understood the basics. For example, hanging active. That is colon cancer. Hanging healing, that's colitis. If I have it occasionally, I have diarrhea occasionally. And the cause for each of them is the same. Trouble with the neighbor. We can now run the exact same example with all kinds of special programs. Let's say my mother-in-law has a plot of land that she doesn't want me to build a house on. I can't get my way against my mother-in-law. That affects my hip joint. A very intense conflict involves the bone. A less intense conflict concerns the cartilage. And where do I locate the mother-in-law? On the partner or the mother-child side? On the partner side, of course. She is not my mother, and she is not my child. She is my natural enemy, my mother-in-law. So, the mother-in-law affects the right hip in the right-handed person. In the case of a conflict shock that's highly acute, isolating, and catches on the wrong foot, it comes to the mother-in-law track. From now on, I will react allergically to my mother-in-law. If she comes to visit, I am sympathicatonic, and I have obsessive thinking on the level of the psyche. On the level of the brain, the Hummer focus is photographable as a target ring disc shape in my cerebral medulla. In the active phase, there is now a cell minus on the level of the organ. In cartilage, this is called necrosis. In bone, osteolysis. The cartilage disappears, or the bone decalcifies. It takes some time for the bone to rub against the bone. Or for the bone to break. Meanwhile, this tissue loss does not hurt. What hurts in bone is the periosteum. The periosteum hurts in the healing, not in the active phase. Now, let's say the solution happens. A month later, lightning strikes my mother-in-law. I take the inheritance and the conflict is definitely solved. She cannot take the property away from me anymore. It is mine now. The mother-in-law lies in the cemetery, conflict solved. But now I'm in the healing phase. Especially with the bone. If I was active for 4 weeks of conflict, then when I'm healing, the pain comes for 14 days. And it takes another 14 days to go. The bone or cartilage is now repaired under swelling, until the crisis. A crisis in the cerebral medulla is not so special. One feels cold, that's about it. And then the swelling goes down, and the pain also goes down. At the end of healing, the cartilage or bone remains thicker than it was before, for a lifetime. That's the point of the luxury group of special programs. I have a unique episode. I have hip pain once in my life for 1 month. The issue is over and will not come back. So, now let's leave my mother-in-law alive. And she has this habit, always on the weekend she comes to visit. The weekend approaches, my mother-in-law approaches, full relapse. I am active with the same program on all 3 levels. I don't need the 3 criteria. It is enough for me to hear my mother-in-law. On Saturday, she's at my home. That doesn't hurt. Sunday, she's leaving. Monday and Tuesday, I have my hip pain. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I am fine. Saturday she comes again, now I have chronic hip pain with my mother-in-law. But take note. You always have to look for the conflict, where the symptoms started. The first symptoms I had, when I first came into healing. The preceding active phase did not hurt. So, I have to interpret the organ symptoms correctly. I need to know, is this a symptom of an active conflict? Or is this a healing phase symptom? So, I have hip pain occasionally. Always at the beginning of the week. Always for about 2 days, and then it's fine. Now, we have the mother-in-law living on the same street, just across the street. And she comes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. I can't get out of my hip pain at all. I just have hip pain throughout. It's called arthritis in cartilage. Let's take it to the extreme. Now we have the mother-in-law living in the same household. I can't get away from my mother-in-law at all, so to speak. And now the cartilage is necrotizing. This is called arthrosis, or wear and tear. This is where conventional medicine has a mechanistic worldview. The more often I operate the hinge, the more the hinge wears out. But what happens in reality when I work hard? Does the tissue become thinner or thicker? Thicker. There is no such thing as wear. If we excavate a skeleton, we can tell whether the individual was left or right-handed, based on which body side has stronger bones. So, wear does not exist. It's always these self-devaluations. For example, osteoarthritis, a mild self-devaluation, active. Arthritis is the same thing, a mild self-devaluation, but in hanging healing. In the example with the mother-in-law, which of these I'll get depends. Does she come every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or does she live in my house? If she lives with me in the house, I am permanently active in the conflict. If she comes only occasionally, I am occasionally conflict active, and the rest of the time I'm in hanging healing. In the case of bone, that would be a bone cyst in the healing phase, or osteoporosis in the conflict active phase. Or even bone cancer, when the bone dissolves. Then I would also have anemia as a blood symptom. Anemia always occurs in the conflict active phase. In the healing phase, I would have leukemia. Hanging healing would be chronic leukemia. There are also myeloid leukemia and lymphocytic leukemia. Myeloid leukemia is a severe self-devaluation in the healing phase. Lymphocytic leukemia is a mild self-devaluation in the healing phase. CML, or chronic myeloid leukemia, is a severe self-devaluation in hanging healing. It keeps coming to new relapses via a track. Something always reminds one of the original conflict from back then. Therefore, of course, we always have to find the associated tracks to a conflict. There must be a reason when it comes to relapses. An ALL, or acute lymphatic leukemia, is a unique acute, but mild self-devaluation that has gone into healing. In the past it wasn't even called leukemia. These patients were given cod liver oil, and ordered to follow up again in 4 weeks. Today, conventional medicine boasts to itself, we have an 80% cure for this leukemia. What does that mean in conventional medicine, cure? Out of 100 children, 20 are dead after 5 years. And the rest are chemically castrated. This is what conventional medicine celebrates as a success. But what is this program according to the Germanische Heilkunde? Lumbago. As mentioned before, when it hurts, the bone is in the healing phase. Then the patient runs to the conventional physician, who diagnoses leukemia from the blood count. Of course, it is also possible that the vertebral body continues to decalcify in a long active phase, and finally collapses. And thus presses on the nerves. This would also cause pain, of course. But with bone, typically it's the healing phase that hurts. And in lumbago, the bone or disc is healing and being repaired with swelling. That causes pressure, which hurts with every movement. This is one-time lumbago. Occasional, polycyclic hanging healing is permanent back pain. If I can't solve that at all, then the vertebrae just collapse. Again, that's just the self-devaluation. Each bone has its specific self-value content. The spine, I failed or I was screwed. The hip, I can't get my way. Or, I feel non-athletic, it hits the knee. You can go through the same thing with the musculature. Some people have an epileptic seizure once in their life. An example for this. A beautiful, tall, dark-haired woman comes to my seminar one day. A very striking person. She doesn't say hello, doesn't speak a word. She sits in the audience and just shakes her head. I thought to myself, well, you don't have to believe anything. To the next seminar she comes again. She doesn't greet, doesn't speak. Just shakes her head. I think to myself, what does she want here anyway? She comes to the third seminar and tells her story. 8 years ago she was pregnant, and let herself be persuaded to have an amniocentesis. Although she didn't really want it. In fact, the examination showed that her child was disabled, and that she should have an abortion. In the process she must have suffered a motor conflict, inability to hold the child. But instinctively she said, that she didn't believe that. I don't have a disabled child. And she carried her girl. Her daughter is 7 years old and healthy. They wanted to kill her healthy child. When she realized that her child was healthy after birth, she solved the motor conflict and got her epileptic seizure. She was taken to the hospital, with sirens wailing. They took a brain CT, and the doctors found edema in the motor center of her cerebrum. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor and epilepsy. She said to the doctors, I supposedly have a brain tumor? I'm supposed to be epileptic? You're altogether just a bunch of idiots. She took their findings and put them in the furnace fire hole at home. A one-time episode, no tracks. The child was definitely healthy. No recessives. A one-time episode. And she was constantly shaking her head about it in my seminars, because the lights had come on as to why she had an epileptic seizure that time. The polycyclic course, that's the epileptic. It can happen suddenly in certain circumstances. You get on the track, you come back off, and you have your epileptic seizure. And we also have sphincters or ring muscles. The rectum, the bladder, the uterus, the cervical sphincters. These sphincters are innervated the other way around. If I am on the run and a lion is after me, my skeletal muscles are innervated. I'm running as fast as I can, but the sphincter opens, then it drops into my pants, and I shit myself with fear. So, the sphincter is not innervated when the skeletal muscles are. Similarly, if I lift the arm of a sleeping person, the arm falls. The skeletal muscles are not innervated while she is asleep. But her sphincter is innervated and keeps tightly closed. So in stress the sphincters open, and in relaxation they keep closed. Otherwise, we would get it regularly in our pants every night. An epileptic is sympathicotonic, and therefore the sphincter is innervated. That is one reason for bedwetting. So it was once with a boy. His parents observed their child during the night and realized that he was bedwetting, because he kept having epileptic seizures. With that, they went to Hummer, and Hummer found the conflict. It was Servant Ruprecht, a horned figure of German-speaking culture who comes on December 6th, to punish naughty children. The boy was under the kitchen table when Servant Ruprecht threw a chain into the kitchen. In that instant, the boy suffered a motor conflict. Now he kept dreaming about Servant Ruprecht. And in dreams, you're always there live, just like it's real life. Maybe you've dreamed that you're being murdered. Yes, fear of death. You're fighting for your life, you wake up and... whoa, that was a nightmare. A conflict load of a few minutes with a pulmonary tissue response, that makes a healing phase of a few minutes, with pulmonary tuberculosis. Just one cough, and the thing is done. But a recurring dream is enough to keep a program going chronically, for a lifetime. Such tracks can have a lifelong effect. So, how do I get such a recurring dream out of my head? How did it get in? With a conflict. And how does he get out? I have to resolve the conflict. So, Hummer asked the boy, "What would you have liked to do, under the kitchen table at that time?" Says the boy, "I would have really wanted to beat the crap out of that guy." Says Hummer, "That's right, that's what you have to do. Find a friend, give him money in advance, and he should dress up as Servant Ruprecht and let you beat him up." So, the parents reenacted the event. The boy was able to rise above the Servant Ruprecht for the first time, and thus got this dream out of his head. Wetting the bed became a thing of the past. Parkinson's disease is an example of a motor program in hanging healing, an always and again recurring crisis. These are mini epileptic seizures, so this is a part of a resolved motor conflict. Imagine a muscle strand. One muscle strand is conflict active. Another muscle strand is conflict resolved, creating spasms. So, a partially resolved motor conflict, that's shaking palsy. And what does partially resolved mean? I have an excellent case, with which I understood exactly what partially resolved means. A woman had rented a house and lived in it with her family, as well as running her small business from it. Suddenly, her landlord died. The community of heirs did not extend the lease, but instead gave her 1 year. After that, she had to get out. 4 times in that 1 year, she had a ready contract for a new house. And at the last minute, the rental contracts broke. In each case, she could not hold on to the contract. This resulted in her having partial paralysis of the muscles that could not hold the contract. The active phase isn't always noticeable. But she was paralyzed, and she had little strength. Then she made a clearance sale. And from the earnings, her family financed a short vacation. As they returned home, the deadline was up. In her mind, the image was firmly fixed in her thinking, "When I get back to the house, all my belongings will be on the street." But that was not the case. They let her continue to live in the house. That was her partial solution. Now her arms began to fly. Shaking palsy of the arms. Her odyssey then led her to Hummer, and Dr. Hummer saw in her brain CT, "You couldn't hold something with your hands." What was that? And so they just came up with the rental contract. Her symptomatology lasted until she could successfully rent a house. Hummer then also predicted the healing, "You will be as if struck dead for 3 weeks, and that's how it was." She was exhausted for 3 weeks, but did not tremble or cramp anymore. This story was 15 years ago. She had Parkinson's 15 years ago. That was hanging active. An active motor conflict is paralysis or flaccid paralysis, for example MS. The biological sense of this program is the play dead reflex. When a mouse can't escape, its brain produces functional failure. When you set the mouse back on its feet, it slumps away. In MS it's always something like that. Being unsafe, being trapped, there's no way to go, neither forward nor backward, neither in nor out. That's the typical thing in MS. And it's the one-time epileptic seizure again, or the individual becomes an epileptic via the track. Parkinson's, MS. It's the same thing. The course of a motor conflict is hanging somewhere along the way. This is also the case with a tremor. A stroke, for example, is the active phase of a motor program with paralysis. However, it could also be that pressure, caused by brain edema, creates loss of motor function. This is how muscle paralysis or weakness can be, because of the healing phase or because of hanging healing. The stroke, I was made a fool of. Let's say someone from the village comes and says, "Helmut, The whole village is laughing at you, your wife is having an affair with the mayor. Everyone knows but you. The blow strikes me. I have been made a fool of. The mayor is a partner. The village is also on the partner site. Now my face is hanging down on the partner site. I can't fight off the mayor with my arms, he's more powerful. I can't hold the partner with my legs. We also hug the partner with the legs. Now I have the stroke. As a right-handed person on the right. If I was a left-handed person, I'd have paralysis on the left. In motor programs, handedness decides which side of the body is affected. You can also play through this with the dermis program, the defilement program. So let's say, you have a conversation with your boss, nose to nose. The boss has a little wet talk. But you can't wipe it off in front of the boss. That's defilement. Now, the dermis makes cell plus, it increases the number of dermis cells to protect you. That's the biological sense of the dermis program. Finally your boss turns around, and you have a chance to wipe yourself off, and you enter the healing phase. In the healing phase, the extra cells are tuberculously broken down again, and then you have a pimple. So, no pimple without corresponding defilement. The occasional pimple is healing. Acne, that's hanging healing. If I can't solve a program like that at all, and so it stays continuously active, then the cell plus gets thicker and thicker, and that's melanoma, skin cancer. A pimple and skin cancer are the same. The pimple is the healing phase, and skin cancer is the conflict active phase. So, if I keep putting tar on a rat's fur, and the rat tries to lick it off, and you keep putting it on, then the animal can't get rid of the defilement, then the melanoma gets bigger and bigger. Or teenagers who start to be interested in the opposite sex, am I pretty enough and all that? And then they have a pimple once and, for heaven's sake, a pimple. With that horrifying shock comes the second pimple. And the second pimple sullies the teenager again, causing the third pimple and the fourth pimple. They're constantly being drawn up anew by their mirror image, and they feel disfigured, sullied by their mirror image. Then you just have to get rid of the mirror. You just have to let acne be acne. The best thing to do is to grab the pubescent and take him somewhere where there are no people, where no one knows him, and where there is no mirror. Then you can watch the acne heal off. Again, hanging active. I don't have eternity to allow this to go on. You have to resolve the conflict, because otherwise the melanoma will get bigger and bigger. Shingles are also healing phase. This can often be an unpleasant hug from which I feel disgusted. The dermis is controlled by segments in the brain. That's how the distinctive shingles shape comes about. The healing then hurts. Shingles are known to hurt. Or leprosy, which is hanging healing. The plague is hanging active. For both, the cause is disfigurement, defilement, and violation of integrity. Leprosy is hanging healing. In the case of glands and glandular-like tissues, more cells are broken down in the healing phase than were previously built up in the conflict active phase. In the active phase, let's say 1,000 cells are built up. 1,100 cells are then broken down in the healing phase. I'll have 100 fewer cells in the lungs, thyroid, breast, middle ear, or the dermis after the healing phase. Now, 100 cells fewer, that's not noticeable. But if I activate this program hundreds or thousands of times, each time ending up with 100 fewer cells, then the initial tissue melts away. This is leading to hypothyroidism, sagging breasts, or in the case of the sclera, leprosy. And hanging active, that's the plague, the bubonic plague. The tissue gets thicker, 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 and I have to solve that. In general you can say, always solve the conflicts of the yellow group. Always solve the conflicts of the orange group. The two old brain groups. The yellow group includes among other things, colon cancer, lung cancer, glandular breast cancer, melanoma. I have to solve those. I also have to solve the bone, tendon, and muscle conflicts, the conflicts of the new brain orange group, as quickly as possible. In the red group, however, I do have to look very closely again. There we have MS, for example. Yes, in our society I can be paralyzed for 50 years. That is not possible in nature, but in our society it is possible. And the healing phase corresponds approximately to the active phase. If I now solve the conflict with 50 years of conflict activity and come into healing, the edema becomes so huge in the brain, I will never survive. That's why in the red group, the therapist has to look twice to see if I'm allowed to solve active conflicts while hanging. It's the same with diabetes. After 30 years of diabetes, I may not survive the healing phase. Because the brain edema becomes too severe. Or I may die of hypoglycemia after the crisis. The insulin shock, that's dangerous, that's very dangerous. Or with a coronary heart attack, we have a maximum of 9 months limit. More than 9 months of conflict load, and the heart attack is fatal. Pulmonary embolism is also the red group. Here the limit is also 9 months. Therefore, with the red group I better look twice, whether I should resolve the conflict or better not. This raises the question, whether I should look for the conflict at all. The probability is very high, that after 50 years the conflict is now irrelevant. When I realize that, I inevitably resolve the conflict. And I inevitably enter a healing phase that I cannot survive. Unfortunately, most alternative healers do not know this. They simply treat the psyche and try to solve every conflict they can find. But the patient has no benefit from healing, if he cannot survive the healing. So in the red group, one must already look very precisely at any conflict-active programs, and be careful not to address them. On the other hand, with hanging healing of a conflict in the red group, there is hardly any conflict load behind it. Because every time I get into the healing, I reduce the conflict load again. If for example, I am in hanging healing with neurodermatitis for 50 years, this is also a program of the red group. If I decisively solve this conflict or absolutely avoid the track, then it may be that the last healing will still be a bit violent. However, then it will be good. After a short time, I'll feel healthy. So, in my example I had neurodermatitis for 50 years. But in a few weeks the neurodermatitis is gone, and the skin is clean. It's the same way with a polycyclic course of a program. I have phases during which I am absolutely healthy. If at this point I solve the track, then there can be no further relapses. I am healthy and stay healthy, although I had a spring allergy to pollen, always just in the spring, every year. Maybe for 50 years. Now I resolve the conflict, and I am healthy. And I stay healthy. I no longer have the spring pollen allergy. But if I have an active hanging healing, I'll get into a healing phase that I can't survive. So for the red group, you have to look twice. You can also play this out with a separation conflict. Consider the example of eczema, occasional eczema that does not disappear and is hanging active. Dry skin. Dry skin, that's cold and that flakes. Among others, dandruff of the head is an example. What is the best remedy for head dandruff? Solve the separation conflict. We associate when we are separated. For example, if I am separated from my beloved bunny that I had always cuddled with my face, then the skin symptoms will start on my face. If I typically had the bunny lying on my chest, I would associate the separation on the skin of my chest. But if I have associated most of the touch with the head, then the skin symptoms will just start on my head. Always where I had associated the most touch, in the moment of shock. An excellent example with head dandruff. You can learn a lot from such a testimonial. Therefore, I recommend collecting testimonials. With this one example, I can clarify 3 things for you. A 30-year-old man came to a seminar, disfigured with head dandruff. It looked terrible, and he also suffered a lot from it. He already knew Germanische Heilkunde very well, and knew which conflict he had to look for. For years, he'd been trying in vain to find a separation conflict, associated with his head. But he has not been able to find it. I saw that he understood how to think biologically, but he just didn't find the separation conflict. 3 years later, he sat on the toilet and thought to himself, hey, I haven't had dandruff on my head for half a year. And suddenly, he knew his separation conflict. Only when everything was over and done with. It was the prettiest girl in the class, in the whole school. She had such blonde angel hair and blue eyes. He had adored this girl secretly, for 2 years. One day, he summoned up all his courage and confessed his love to her in writing. She let the love letter go around the class. The teacher then read this letter in front of the class. At that moment, he would have liked to sink into the ground, forever. That was the separation conflict, associated on the head, the hair. This girl was taboo for him. Never again did he approach her. But the fascination for this girl, for this type of woman, with long blonde curls and blue eyes remained. Thus, this type of woman became the track, as did classmates. When he met one of his classmates years later, the first question was about this girl. What is she doing today? How is she? And so, he had head dandruff. Whenever he met such a type of woman on the street, he had head dandruff. Half a year ago, he was invited to a class reunion by precisely this woman. Of course, he went to the reunion with his head full of dandruff. He's greeted by her, and he doesn't recognize her at first, only by her voice does he recognize her. Short, straight hair. False teeth, badly made up. Very overweight. Thinks he to himself, for heaven's sake, I'm glad this is not my wife. And the dandruff was gone. He was healed and never had dandruff again. If you look at this case more closely, the first thing you'll note is that he specifically tried to find his separation conflict for years but did not find it, even though the tracks were omnipresent. He even resolved his conflict without realizing it. He completely missed that resolution point, because the track always triggers the unconscious, unconsciously. The second thing to note is that often an individual is chronically ill, stumbling from therapist to therapist, trying one dandruff shampoo after another, and nothing helps. Eventually, when he either resolves his conflict or successfully avoids the tracks, he gets well. His dandruff clears up. Then he swears, price Ann. It's expensive, but it works. It got rid of my dandruff. You have to try it, too. Nobody looks at the psyche. But up there is where it happens. But, because you can make a lot of money with it, we always try to find a remedy. We are fooled. And the third thing to note, why did he associate the conflict to his head? There must be a reason. He was at a seminar once and I asked him, did she ever pet you? He says, no, unfortunately not. Did you caress her? Says he, no, I would never have dared. Why did he associate the separation on the head? Because of her angel hair. And he was cured of her as soon as he saw her with short and straight hair. That cured him, because in his imagination, even 15 years after school, she was still his dream woman. With a perfect body and long blonde curls. His experience, that this woman no longer exists. That today he is glad that she is not his wife. That solved his original separation conflict, and at the same time all the tracks. So, there you can see and learn from our testimonials. Neurodermatitis is also a hanging healing condition. Take a look at the faces of small children on their first day at kindergarten, and see the drama that unfolds. The child screams his soul out of his body for his mother. In the afternoon and at night, he's with his mother. In the morning, the child has to go back to kindergarten. In the afternoon and at night, he's back to the solution. In, out, hanging healing. Neurodermatitis. A wart is also hanging healing. In the active phase, the squamous epithelium ulcerates. In the healing phase, the squamous epithelium is rebuilt, built up, and built up some more. This is the wart or also basal cell carcinoma. The conflict is always just separation when I have a polycyclic special program, for example, on my lip. I drank from a beer glass in the restaurant, and I see leftover food from the previous person on the edge of the glass. Yuck. The separation conflict associates at my lip. In the active phase it ulcerates, and in the healing, it is repaired under the swelling. Then when I leave the restaurant, I get my cold sore. In the moment of a conflict, the tracks are programmed in. My brain now links restaurant to dirty glasses. And now, every time I'm in a restaurant, no matter how clean the glass is, I have an allergic reaction. And I subsequently have my cold sore. Then the cold sore gives me confirmation that in that restaurant the glasses are dirty. That is what's meant by polycyclic. You can also see this with a cold. That is the scent conflict. Let's say I notice that, when I'm in traffic, I often sneeze. So, there's something I need to smell, but cannot. A danger, a dicey situation. What happens now? The nasal mucosa ulcerates at this moment of danger. The ulceration expands the nasal cavity, which is the biological sense of this special program. It's so that I can absorb smells better, so to speak. To be able to better assess a danger. The nose gets dry in the process, and when I resolve the conflict, this cell minus is repaired with swelling and fluid formation. Then I am snuffy, and I use up one handkerchief after the other. And in the crisis, I have to sneeze. Pay conscious attention when someone rides with you, who is not used to your sporty driving style. How often does he sneeze? Sneezing is the perfect special biological program for beginners, to observe how the 5 biological laws of nature work in daily situations. Or consider a springtime pollen allergy. Pollen flies for a few weeks in the spring. If a scent conflict happens once during this time, now, when you are outside during this time, your nose registers this pollen. That's how sensitive our organism is. It has memorized these white compounds in the air. And when they are present again, your nasal mucosa ulcerates. If you are indoors, then there is no pollen. And there you are off the track. And therefore you enter the healing phase. Your nasal mucosa is repaired with swelling, and now you're snuffling. But what about when you're going in and out 10 to 15 times a day? So, you have a recurrence 10 to 15 times a day, and you repeat this program for a whole 2 to 3 weeks. You're constantly huffing. In summer, autumn and winter, there is no pollen, you are healthy. Until the following spring, when the pollen flies again, and everything starts all over again. In, out, and then you are permanently snuffy again, and the rest of the year, you are healthy. Sinusitis is the hanging healing, but when you are hanging active, that's the nasal mucosal ulcer. So, if you can't resolve the conflict at all, then the cell minus becomes bigger and bigger, an ulcer. In animal experiments, if I constantly inject formalin, which is a pungent smelling chemical, into a rat's nose, and the animal suffers a scent conflict and cannot resolve it, then the rat's nasal ulcer gets bigger and bigger. From this, conventional medicine constructs that formalin must be carcinogenic. It's like holding my head and squirting shit up my nose 100 times a day. For a whole week. I wouldn't be able to resolve the conflict in that situation either. So I would get my nasal ulcer. But that doesn't mean that shit is carcinogenic. The problem is that the psyche is left out, even in laboratory animals. The psyche is of no interest in conventional medicine. Not in this medicine industry. Formalin is not carcinogenic. The common denominator in the rat and in me is at the level of the psyche, where we find the stink conflict. In the cerebral cortex, the Hummer focus is photographically present. And on the organ level we find the nasal mucosa ulcer. I can reproduce this on the next best case, at any time, no matter whether human or animal. If someone has a nasal mucosal ulcer, he must have a scent conflict on all 3 levels synchronously. Not everyone who works with formalin has a nasal mucosal ulcer. And not everyone who has nasal mucosal cancer works with formalin. The statement of conventional medicine is not scientific, because it is not verifiable in the next case. We can go through precisely the same thing with the intestines. Trouble in the active phase. I have constipation. In the healing phase, I have diarrhea. Occasional diarrhea, or diarrhea that doesn't go away. That's hanging healing. But if I don't solve this program at all, then I have colon cancer. Hanging healing in the large intestine is called colitis. In the small intestine it would be Crohn's disease. These patients have an anger conflict that is activated over and over again via a tract. Again and again short reprieves produce the symptoms of healing. Colic is the healing phase. It's a crisis of the smooth muscle from the intestine. In the healing phase, creating abdominal pain. As in the conflict active phase, we have constipation during the crisis. But briefly, for only as long as the crisis lasts. In the healing phase we have diarrhea. And in the crisis we have constipation again, followed by diarrhea. Then the program has gone through its full course, and I feel healthy again. Flatulence is the conflict active phase. A conflict that associates a bit closer to the mouth end of the digestive tract comes to gas. The conflict is a morsel conflict, a morsel that is stuck and can't be moved on. This is the indigestible morsel, the disagreement. Gas is formed to inflate the intestine, to be better able to transport the stuck morsel forward through the inflated intestine. Farting is then again the healing. The gas is no longer needed and so it's discharged. But if I fart constantly, then that's hanging healing. And we can run through the same course with a lump in the breast. Let's assume that her husband once comes home from the bowling evening not at midnight as usual, but at 4 a.m. with lipstick on his shirt collar. So, now there is real trouble and a beating with a rolling pin. But a week later, while washing his shirts, the wife finds out that this is not lipstick at all. It's the ointment for his fever blister. Oops. Mistakes can happen. You resolve the dispute, and in the following week the lump is tuberculated. After a week the lump is gone, at the end of the healing phase. A never diagnosed breast cancer. What remains is an empty cavern, a scarred cavity. If this woman then goes for a mammogram, her breast is squeezed. So this cavern is not visible. But if her breast is x-rayed while hanging freely, then the cavern is open, and you can see this cavern. That is why they started to x-ray women aged 18 to 80 with sagging breasts in America. In this way, caverns were discovered in almost all women. They had been preceded by breast cancers that had never been diagnosed. But now, with this dragnet, they drive their mammography buses to every last village. Even in the forest they summon the women. And if the women don't show up, they'll be summoned again. In this way they discover every carcinoma, even the smallest one that wouldn't have been worth mentioning at all. But now the woman has been caught in a cancer diagnosis. Now the medical machinery starts to run, and we know the success rate for that. 5 women out of 100 survive the next 5 years. It's all just a gigantic business at our expense, and on the backs of the patients. We once had a study circle leader who'd studied medicine for a few semesters. One time, her group had to dissect the corpse of an old woman. A woman from the senior citizens' home who had died of old age. She had given her body to science. And now these students are snipping away at her, and diagnosing 3 cancers and 1 tuberculosis. This study circle leader said to her professor, "Professor, I don't understand this at all. This woman had 3 cancers and tuberculosis, and she died of old age. How can that be?" Says the professor, "Yes, the lady probably never went to the doctor. You know, when the doctor walks behind the coffin at a funeral, that's the cause following the effect." Here's another example of a polycyclic conflict course. An old farmer's wife tells us, she has a recurring lump in her breast. It periodically gets big, bursts open, bleeds and stinks, and then disappears again. At some point, the same lump comes again. Bursts open, bleeds, stinks, and disappears again. Says the woman, "I've had that for 20 years. But I don't let anyone touch it." If it's always the same lump, then it's always the same person. The same argument with the same person. In this case it was her drunk husband, who occasionally had to be pulled out of a ditch and dragged home. Always the same event, and always it was the talk of the whole village. Hanging healing after the initial tissue melts away eventually leads to hanging breasts. A woman then has no glandular tissue at all in her breast. It's like a sagging sack. Let's take as an example, someone whose parents fight. She worries about dad, she worries about mom, then the parents reconcile again. The stone falls from the daughter's soul, and she gets into healing. But the very next month, her parents are at war again, and she is back on the track of worrying about mom and dad. Then they reconcile again, but a month later, the sparks fly again. The original tissue melts away with each relapse, and glandular tissue that is gone remains gone. It does not return anew. In every special program we have to give way somewhere. And the less special programs we go through, the older we get. A conflict eats away at our substance somewhere. This is an emergency program, and if I can't solve it, the lump gets bigger and bigger. I don't have unlimited time to continue such a program of conflict activity. I have to solve it. Otherwise, I will die of emaciation. I won't eat. I'll have no appetite. I won't sleep. I'll be constantly sympathicatonic. And at some point my battery will be empty. And, ladies and gentlemen, we can run through this course with the retina or with caries, or with a prostate. Everything that is chronic runs via tracks. So in principle, you will find every allergy and every chronic disease on the diagnostic chart. You just need to understand the basics. You can understand this from the history of development. Our ancestors who conquered the land needed a locomotion system. Later, they developed social behavior. You have the record of this in your own body. But in corona or in swine flu, you have to believe. That's the difference between real science and an artificial religion. How can you recognize a cult? By its dogma. Period. You cannot found a cult without dogma. Real science cannot have dogmas. Conventional medicine has hundreds of dogmas. Especially about metastasis, or infection, or that microbes are evil. There's no proof of this, you just have to believe it. Otherwise you will be excommunicated. And that's the superstition and tyranny of the darkest Middle Ages. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you were able to gain some knowledge and complete your understanding of the 5 biological laws of nature. Make Germanische Heilkunde your hobby, and then no doctor and no medicine will stand between you and your health. It's been my pleasure to have you at this seminar tutorial, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Helmut Pilhar, father of Olivia.